Hello, and welcome to the special historical report covering the 60th anniversary of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. On November 22nd of this year, 2023, we will observe the 60th anniversary of the tragedy that struck America when President Kennedy, while campaigning in Dallas, Texas, was shot and killed on November the 22nd of 1963. I'm your host, Andrew Muller, Chief of Operations for Liberty Sentinel Media, and today we're joined by an expert on the Kennedy assassination, Jack Roth. Jack is the author of the book Killing Kennedy, Exposing the Plot, the Cover-Up, and the Consequences. In the book, he has eyewitness interviews where people saw the assassination firsthand, as well as individuals who were very close to family members and got a firsthand view of the events that unfolded on that horrible day in our nation's history. Jack is an author, a historian, an investigative journalist, and a documentarian. Alex Newman, Liberty Sentinel CEO, actually interviewed Jack Roth on his show Liberty Hour this past summer, but we wanted to bring him back to cover the 60th anniversary of the assassination of Kennedy and get into more details. Jack, welcome to the program.
Hello, Andrew. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much for being here. Now, a lot of people, when they talk about the Kennedy assassination, they get into the details of Lee Harvey Oswald and the specifics of who shot Kennedy and how many bullets there were. But I think you and I probably share a fairly similar approach to this, that the details are a little bit of a distraction from the bigger picture, which is why. Why was Kennedy killed? What was behind the Kennedy killing? Who benefited? And was there a cover-up? So to start off, let me just ask you, why do you think President John F. Kennedy was killed? Why?
I think in the end, what killed Kennedy, he wasn't playing by the rules, so to speak. And what I mean by that is the rules that had been set up by what I like to call an elitist group of individuals who had been running the country since the robber barons of the 1800s. I mean, these very, very powerful families, very, very powerful institutions that were really, truly pulling the strings when it came to foreign policy and other things like that. And, listen, he became president at the height of the Cold War. And I think that also played a major role in why he was eventually killed. I think, again, I tell people, when they ask me that question, who killed Kennedy? I don't get into details about a specific person or two or seven or eight. I just say the Cold War killed him and its cold warriors killed him. And I think it's accurate to say that. And without getting into too much detail of the minutia of who was behind the grassy knoll, who was behind, who was on the sixth floor of the depository, and, who might have been in a dark room giving the ultimate order to do it. So I think it's fair to say we have to look at that and also look at what Kennedy came into and then what he tried to do.
Yeah. And when we talk about, who was behind the grassy knoll and the Warren Report and all these different things that have come out about the details, the big picture ends up becoming lost of these Cold War warriors and what the establishment ruling class gained by Kennedy's death and removal from office. I want to ask you this. I really think you hit the nail on the head because you talk about the 3 C's. You talk about conspiracy, corruption, and cover-up. And I really do think that's the best way of looking at this. So I think we're in agreement that there was a conspiracy to kill Kennedy. This wasn't just some lone crazed Lee Harvey Oswald who luckily, got up to the book depository, became an employer there, even though there's good reason to believe the CIA had tabs on his whereabouts and what he was doing and who he was. Happened to know that the bubble top would be off the limousine, knew that he was going to take this particular route, etc. All these things. That's harder to believe than the fact that there was a conspiracy. So if there was a conspiracy, you say there are these Cold War warriors behind it. A lot of people speculate, and I know RFK Jr. speculated this, even Robert Kennedy, JFK's brother, speculated this, that the CIA had a level of involvement in this. We know that the CIA definitely has corruption in it, potentially even some communist corruption. Charles Pink, who was the president of the OSS Society, which was the Operation of Secret Services, which turned into the CIA after World War II, responded to some allegations in a letter to the editor in the Washington Post saying, no, the OSS wasn't infiltrated by communists. We hired them. And then, of course, the CIA took over the OSS's responsibilities. So is it far-fetched to say that the CIA had some level of involvement in the Kennedy assassination?
Yeah, it is safe to say. And again, can we say that with a 100%? I'm certain of it. Of course, we can't because the waters have been too muddled. But I think if we look at things critically, from a critical thinking standpoint and from an objective standpoint, there's no question about the fact that the CIA played some kind of role in it, mainly because Lee Harvey Oswald was a CIA operative. He was an intelligence asset. This has become very clear. And he was first involved in the false defector program when he supposedly defected to the Soviet Union. Well, that false defector program was run by the CIA and a man named William Harvey, who, the one thing that all these people I'm about to mention have in common is that they hated the Kennedys. So we'll get that clear up front. And there were reasons for that. But so, yeah, you have Oswald as an operative, as an intelligence agent, and a very good one, by the way, but he was lower level. So he was just taking orders, doing what he was told to do. And we can see that because of his movements the summer before the assassination, leading up to the assassination, and even before that. So, yeah, so the CIA, again, you have to look back to the things that happened leading up to it. So you have Allen Dulles, very powerful man. And and you also have his brother, who was the Secretary of State under Eisenhower. These were very powerful people. And so, everything was going along. They had their wars. We were in Korea, and everything was going smoothly. And then this upstart Kennedy actually beats Nixon. Nixon was supposed to win that election. And again, people don't remember. If they don't remember, that was the closest election we've ever had. It was very tight. And it was actually the mob who helped Kennedy get over the hump and win that election, which is why they were happy to help out during the assassination by providing, sharpshooters, assassins, whatever they could provide. They weren't the mob was not the mastermind behind the assassination or the cover-up. They didn't have that kind of clout. They couldn't do that, but they were very good at killing people, which is why the CIA would hire the mob. And they did this all during the Cold War. They would hire the mob to take care of certain people for them. The CIA was very good at that. So Kennedy comes in, and right away, 1961, Bay of Pigs, in a situation where Allen Dulles kind of was trying to force Kennedy into a corner to provide air support for that. And Kennedy felt like he was lied to by Allen Dulles and other members of the CIA. And Kennedy took responsibility for the failure of the Bay of Pigs. As far as to the media and everything, he came out and he said it was my fault. But behind the scenes, he was furious with the CIA, realized they were out of control, and fired Allen Dulles. He fired Allen Dulles. And that was a big no-no. That was his first huge mistake. As far as it wasn't actually a mistake, he should have done it, but it was a mistake as far as these elitist people, this group was concerned, because that you just didn't do that. So then the next year you have the Cuban Missile Crisis, and here we go again, where Kennedy realizes that in a split second millions of Americans could die. And what was happening is the CIA and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, they were encouraging war with the Soviets and with Cuba. They wanted to annihilate Cuba off the face of the earth. They didn't care about collateral damage because they knew that we had the advantage and we would win the war. We might lose 10 million people, but we would win the war. And that's all they cared about. So, but Kennedy's like, 10 million Americans can't die in a nuclear holocaust. That's unacceptable. Probably a lot more than that would have. So at this point, Kennedy changed his strategy in office when he realized that this had to stop. The Cold War was becoming very, very dangerous. And that's when he started to go behind backdoor channels to Khrushchev to try to, usher in a new peace, right? To cool tensions a little bit. Well, again, these warmongers, these Cold Warriors, did not like that at all. So, by 1963, Kennedy has angered all the wrong people because he's insisting on, this is the way it's going to be. I'm not going to play by those old rules. This is not right for the American people. And ultimately, I think that got him killed. So when you have to look at the CIA, people like Allen Dulles, people like Richard Helms, people like William Harvey, and they were all involved with William Harvey was in charge of Operation Mongoose, which was, again, training Cuban exiles to go back into Cuba and overthrow Castro. All these things were happening in the early 60s. And here's Kennedy, an upstart. And people might say, well, what if the Kennedys elite? They were a pretty elite family. Yes and no. They were very well educated, Harvard educated. Absolutely. They were smart. John Kennedy was a brilliant guy, and so was Robert. They knew what they were doing. But a couple of things. First of all, they were Catholic, Irish Catholic, unacceptable to the real elite. You know what I'm saying? It's that very almost waspy, you come off the Mayflower. That's the only way you're in that group. Okay. And so they were upstarts. They were never going to be accepted in that society. And the father, they thought, obviously, well, they were correct. And, he was a bootlegger. He was a criminal, but so were all their relatives. So were all their grandfathers and great grandfathers, because they were the robber barons. Right. So, it was hypocritical. But listen, the only thing that matters to these people still to this day is that they maintain and grow their power, and they continue to accumulate wealth, which, of course, goes hand in hand with power.
Yeah, absolutely. And Allen Dulles, of course, then later served on the Warren Commission appointed by LBJ to oversee the investigation air quotes, of John F. Kennedy's death. Doesn't really seem like a conflict of interest, right? The guy who fired you get to look over the facts of his death. So no big deal.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And he was also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, which isn't necessarily a super friendly organization to American sovereignty, to say the least. So, Jack, America's trajectory really changed after Kennedy died. The war in Vietnam really began for real. The Camelot was basically over. American exceptionalism was never the same. Speak to that. What changed when Kennedy died? And then also Lyndon B. Johnson. Was he a player in this, or was he just was this a happy accident for Lyndon, and he was able to achieve what he always wanted to because of this Secret Service mistake?
Sure. Well, let's start with the fact that American exceptionalism began to erode right after Kennedy was assassinated. So, and again, history is important. People need to understand their history, our history. And after World War II through the 1950s, we were the white knights. We were the good guys. We had helped defeat the Nazis in World War II, even though we took a lot of them over here to do our dirty work. That's another conversation. But we were the good guys. Our government wore the white hats. There was an American exceptionalism. We were the best. We had the best quality of life in the 50s. Think about it. You could buy a house. If you worked at all, you could buy a house for your family, and one single family. So if you had a wife and 2 kids, the man in the family, or one person in the family, could support the family and have a nice house in a suburban neighborhood. Of course, that's not true anymore. But so that was, but then Kennedy is killed, and this is what happens. It's psychological, and a lot of it's subconscious. Trust starts to erode in the institutions that we were brought up being indoctrinated to trust. So the government, the military, the CIA, our churches, the whole, that they could do no wrong no matter what. And all of a sudden we're like, wait a minute, something is rotten in the state of Denmark, right? Something's not right about this. The minute Jack Ruby kills Lee Harvey Oswald live on TV, people who were critical thinkers and objective thinkers are like, oh, well, what was that? It immediately should have become a conspiracy to anyone who, again, thinks critically about what they just saw. But then you have the media, which the CIA controlled, Operation Mockingbird, which was led by Cord Meyer, another one of these Cold Warrior guys in the CIA, so that they knew that the media was going to tell the people of this country whatever they wanted them to tell them. So they knew they had them in their pocket. So that was important. That was imperative to the assassination working and making people believe that it was just Oswald. So you have, all of a sudden, there's an erosion of trust and faith in certain institutions. And then you have Lyndon Johnson. People ask me all the time, did Lyndon Johnson play a hand in this? Was he the one responsible, et cetera, et cetera? And again, what I did in the book, I interviewed certain people who had done an enormous amount of research on particular other people. So I interviewed Phil Nilsson for the book, who has written a couple of incredible books on Lyndon Johnson. And I asked him those questions. I asked, what was he like? What are we dealing with when we're dealing with Lyndon Johnson? Well, he was very corrupt from his Texas politician days, and the Good Old Boy Network in Texas. That could be an entire show to talk about that stuff. And but he was a narcissist. He was a sociopath. He was a very, very bad person, Lyndon Johnson. So you go from Camelot and John Kennedy, who not everyone loved, but you had to admit it was kind of nice. You could feel proud as a country having him and Jackie, right? President and first lady. Now we got Lyndon Johnson, this buffoon, this horrible, crass person. And of course, he's just doing whatever his overlords say. Oh yeah, well, I'll give you your war in Vietnam, right? And he did. And that made these people a ton of money, and it gave him power, which he wanted more than anything else in the world. So now you have that. Then a couple of years later, Nixon, Watergate. By this point, it's like, what? And there's something called cognitive dissonance. It's when what you see happening makes you feel incredibly uncomfortable based on the way you were brought up and what you were taught to believe. So as you're watching the Kennedy assassination and the Vietnam War, the counterculture movement, and then Nixon and Watergate, if you're an old school World War II war hero, this is cognitive dissonance for you. You do not want to believe what you're seeing is actually happening. So that's why a lot of people was like, no, they couldn't accept it. There's like, no, our government couldn't do these things. No, our politicians. And so you had that going on. And then, but the younger generations, of course, were like this, they were on top of that, just like younger generations tend to be all the time. So that's what started to happen. And it's continued to happen because we've never healed. We've never known the truth about what happened with JFK. No one's ever come out and said, you know what, back then, the CIA could come out and say, back then we had some rogue elements and the Cold War was out of hand. And yeah, we were out of control. And there were some people there that did things they shouldn't have done. And they were partially responsible for the Kennedy assassination. Lee Harvey Oswald was not only was he not the lone shooter, but he didn't shoot at all that day. He was a patsy. Just come out with it. It's obvious, but they never will. And until they do that, we'll continue to erode as a nation. And I think we've seen that.
Yeah. You talked about losing trust in the institutions. And I think that, I'm in my 20s, so I don't remember a time where, there was this Camelot type mentality. The idea of one person working in a family and being able to buy an affordable house is just an unbelievable thought in today's economy. I wish it was the case, Jack, but it's not anymore. But talking about the media cover-up that ensued after Kennedy's death in the 70s, we actually did get a select committee on assassinations, a House Select Committee on Assassinations. And it's interesting. One of the first things they uncovered was that, surprise, the Warren Commission never investigated a conspiracy. And the chairman of that commission, who was an interesting guy, he said that the first thing we found out, this was Congressman Lewis Stokes, the first thing we found out was there was no investigation into conspiracy regarding JFK's death. So speak to the Warren Commission. For those who don't know, what was the Warren Commission? Was it a government cover-up? Did it examine all the facts? You're somebody who, in your book, you interviewed eyewitnesses, you interviewed experts, researchers. It almost seems like you interviewed more people than the Warren report did. What was this report, and was it legit?
Sure. Well, it was a farce from the beginning. The Warren Commission was put together by Lyndon Johnson, right? It was like, well, we'll get to the bottom of this. Now, again, I don't know what Lyndon Johnson's role, if any role he had in this, but I guarantee you he was very happy when Kennedy died because he wanted that power. So, but he also knew all those Texas people. I mean, there were so many Texas people involved, the big oil, very, very, very powerful people in Texas with a lot of money that played a big part in all of our politics. And 99.9% of them were Cold Warriors. So Johnson, it's for show, really. It was like, let's put the Warren Commission. So what he does is he strong arms Earl Warren. Earl Warren was actually a decent man, and he put him in charge of it. The Supreme Court Justice Earl Warren, a good man, honest man. He's going to lead it up. Earl Warren reluctantly decides to be that person. You don't know what went on behind closed doors, but at any rate, that happened. And then all of a sudden, now we mentioned the name earlier, Alan Dulles is now on the Warren Commission, the man who JFK fired and who everyone knew hated JFK. And it was obviously the former director of the CIA. And here he is now as part of the Warren Commission. That should send up a huge red flag for people. And then you get other, what I like to call lackeys, the Gerald Fords of the world, who were just going to do what they're told so they can have power down the road. Ford became president. These people did what they were told, and they were going to be rewarded for it. Arlen Specter, who is an attorney for the Warren Commission, who came up with the ludicrous single bullet theory, and which is probably the most absurd theory ever proposed ever during the history of humanity. I mean, it's really ridiculous, and yet people bought it. But anyone who really read the Warren Commission report was actually volumes and volumes of it. And then they kind of mashed it down into about 800 pages, which are still very long. And it was a lot of nonsense, right? It was a lot of stuff about Lee Harvey Oswald's mother's dentures. I mean, there was the most ridiculous thing in this. But so people, again, who were reading it, who were critical thinkers, are like, what am I reading here? And that's what happened with a lot of people, that when it came out, they were like, this doesn't make sense. This is wrong. And it started some of the early journalists and JFK assassination researchers on their quest, because they were like, this is ridiculous. Right. They didn't, like you said, they didn't even go into they didn't ask the important questions. So it was obviously a whitewash. The whole thing was set up to be that way. And then the mainstream media, again, was going to play its part. Oh, the Warren Commission came out, these great, wonderful, honest men, the best we have, right? Finalized this report. This is what they came up with. So we believe them, period. Well, what about Jack Ruby? Well, we'll go back to that single bullet theory thing. That's absurd. Right. Of course, Arlen Specter winds up becoming a senator in Pennsylvania, very powerful for forever. People don't realize, right? You play ball with these people, they'll reward you. And that's what they did. So the Warren Commission, again, it's common sense. Right. And I encourage people, you're not going to read every volume of the Warren Commission, even the 800 pages. It's too much to read, but that's on purpose.
Yeah.
That's on purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. And they didn't want people to think critically and ask the tough questions about what happened. Just trust the experts. I want to backtrack a little bit to some things we were talking about regarding who benefited from Kennedy's death. And one thing that's just obvious looking at history is, of course, the escalation in the war in Vietnam. We saw John F. Kennedy on October 11th signed National Security Action Memorandum 263, which ordered a beginning of a withdrawal of troops from Vietnam. There was about 16,000 troops in Vietnam. Many of them were military advisors, right? They weren't necessarily supposed to be boots on the ground fighting. Some people broke the rules of engagement there. But Kennedy, along with Secretary McNamara and General Maxwell Taylor, had been having discussions, right, about removing the troops from Vietnam. And you see a lot of people who contest that, like, oh, Kennedy wasn't going to pull troops out of Vietnam. Kennedy wasn't going to back up from Vietnam. That's just a conspiracy theory that Kennedy was going to pull out of the war. That was not a causation for his death. But yet we see Kennedy behind the scenes through all of these documents that the ones we've been able to obtain, that no, he was going to pull troops out of Vietnam. He was going to back off of the war. And then, of course, after his death, everything changed. We ended up spending $141 billion in Vietnam, lost thousands and thousands and thousands of aircrafts. And it was a very costly war that we were destined to lose. So what does the Vietnam War factor play into this equation with the military-industrial complex? We hear a lot of people speak about the Kennedy assassination and use that. The CIA, the military-industrial complex, even RFK Jr. has spoken out against that and said that this entity, which is the military-industrial complex, was one of the key players behind Kennedy's death. What's your take on that?
Well, I agree. And again, look at what happened. So you have Kennedy, who realizes after the Cuban Missile Crisis, this has got to stop. Something needs to change. So he's working behind the scenes with Khrushchev for détente. All right. He wants to start a joint space program so that in 1969, we're going to land on the moon together with the Russians. Well, of course, this is unacceptable to Cold Warriors, whose greatest enemy ever on the face of the earth are the communists. So having said that, so here's Kennedy withdrawing troops, withdrawing advisors. He said he wanted all advisors out by 65 or something to that effect. The memo saying, listen, this is because McNamara would go over there and say, this is not a good situation. We really can't win this war. I mean, if we use nuclear weapons, we could, but of course that's not an option. So if there's a conventional war here, we're never going to win. They spoke to the French, and the French told them, you're never going to win. They knew, because they had just been through it and lost. So here you have Kennedy, and here's follow the money. That's like, solving a crime 101, right? What do they say? Follow the money. Follow the money. General Dynamics, Bell Helicopter, these huge companies who had a major stake in the Vietnam War and making a ton of money. And they did. If you look at the statistics, right, they made millions and billions of dollars. It was Bell Helicopter. It was all helicopters. So anytime a helicopter went down, they just built another one, and they got carte blanche to do so. They had all these government contracts. Everyone was making money on this. All right. People like Alan Dulles and, his brother, John Foster, people don't realize they had major shares of stock in a lot of these companies. It was all about money and power. So they needed their wars. And that was kind of the modus operandi starting after World War II, when once we dropped the bomb on Japan, we knew that couldn't happen again. That just wasn't tenable. Couldn't do that. So there had to be conventional wars, long, drawn out wars in other countries where we send our young people there to die. And they're there for a very long time. And by the way, that's still happening today. But follow the money. Who's making all the money on that? So that was an imperative to the Cold Warriors. They were going to Vietnam, and Kennedy was like, nope, we're not going to Vietnam. So there alone, you had that huge butt of heads. And here's what I tell people too. I think what we realized after the Kennedy assassination, and we're still realizing this, I think we have to be reminded over and over again, that the president of the United States doesn't really wield the power we think he or she does. It's a figurehead position. They have power in certain ways that, in other words, you have Congress, you have the three-pronged system. And yes, of course, they have a power within that. Okay. But I think what Kennedy realized the hard way is he thought, because Robert Kennedy was his attorney general, they were pretty egotistical. I mean, they were flawed. They weren't perfect. And they were like, well, we have power. We have enormous power. No, you don't, because the real power lies elsewhere. And you're learning the hard way where that power lies. And Kennedy, at some point, he just couldn't accept that. He was like, no, this has to be done. This is the right thing to do. And people knew there was talk of, they're going to kill you. That whole idea of, and Kennedy never thought they would have the gall to actually kill him. He never thought that. And so I had spoken to some people who, had spoken way back then to Robert, and that was his first thing. Robert Kennedy was like, called the CIA and is like, did you kill my brother? This is the first people he called. So anyway, getting back to Vietnam War was critical in that. It was part of the reason he was killed, but it was actually one of the bigger reasons. It was just that whole bunch and group of reasons that they had to get this guy Kennedy out of office. And they were very good at doing this in other countries. Yeah. The CIA were the masters of coups, right? take out elected leaders in other countries and put in their own puppets. So they were good at that, doing it outside. And all they did with the Kennedy assassination is they brought that inside. So instead of doing it in Havana or doing it in Vietnam, they did it in Texas, and they got rid of Kennedy. Problem solved.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when you're talking about the CIA and this global effort to remove leaders, you know, Harry Truman wrote a letter, and it was an article that was published about a month after Kennedy's assassination. He talked about the CIA. And of course, Truman was the guy who signed the CIA into being, basically. And he said that he was concerned about the direction the CIA was taking, that it was becoming a cloak and dagger, was the term he used, entity that was a foreign agitator, a foreign policy agitator, that it wasn't gathering information for the president as it was intended to do, but it was actually working to bring about endless wars, basically, and be a foreign policy agitator. And he said this might be a cause for some explosive issues that we've been having recently. And who knows what he meant by that. But interesting timing, being published a month after the president's death. So, Jack, with about the 10, 15 minutes we have left here, let's talk about today, what the JFK assassination means to us 60 years later. You know, like I said earlier in the interview, I'm in my early 20s. I love America. I love our history. I love our country. And when I talk to my peers, a lot of them don't know anything about America or our Constitution or our founding fathers, or even just 60 years ago with JFK. And, you know, I'm wearing my little JFK vintage campaign pin here, not because I'm a Kennedy Democrat or anything, but because what happened to him was probably one of the most tragic things that ever happened to this country. And people don't know anything about it in any substantial or meaningful way, or why it's so detrimental to our country, and why this event very well could be the first domino in the series of dominoes that fell that led to the death of American exceptionalism. So, Jack, what is your message to people, particularly young people, about why they should care about this 60 years later, and why people should look for the truth?
Because it still matters, and it still matters because it's affecting you today. There's a reason that's on purpose that a lot of kids, younger people these days, don't know history. I think that teaching history is critical, and teaching your own history in a very honest way is incredibly critical in order for countries to move forward and become better. And we have not done that. We just have not, you know. And I remember growing up in the history and read. I loved history; it was my favorite subject, but I never read about the Native American genocide and that. And then everything I read was very cookie cutter. It was very, you know, again, whitewashed, right? It was all about Columbus and this and that. So we were always great, always the good guys. No matter what was happening in the world, we were always the good guys. But realistically, and I think European countries have gotten better at this because they have longer histories. Think about Germany. Germany, I think it's safe to say they were the bad boy of the 20th century. I think it's safe to say, starting 2 world wars, probably responsible for well over 100 million deaths, just all told by those wars, being the aggressor and whatnot, and of course with Nazi Germany and all that. So, but what do? They teach their kids. It's required that they teach them about the Holocaust and everything about the 20th century. This is what happened. This is how a country of, for the most part, very peaceful people literally became monsters because of this one man. But they learn it. They critique it. They understand it. They use critical thinking skills in the process. And now they're able to say, okay, listen, we did that. Yes, we've come to terms with that. We've apologized to the world for that. But now this is who we are now. And we can move forward and move forward clear-headed and clear-minded to say, this is who we are, this is who we want to be, and we're going to continue to move towards that and always become a better country. If you think you're the best country, there's no reason to want to improve it. And that's what I think Americans' attitudes are. So we're the best, doesn't matter. We go to war everywhere. Oh, we need to, right? But no one critically thinks about what's happening and the collateral damage, the innocent civilians that are killed in these wars. What caused the wars? What about these the 9/11s and, and the Gulf of Tonkin and Pearl Harbor. What really happened there? Was it the kind of thing where they just said, let's let it happen so we can have our war because we need more public support? All right. There isn't quite the political will. So let's have an event like that happen and we'll let it happen. It's not necessarily that they planned, Pearl Harbor with the Japanese, but they let it happen. Just let it happen. This way we'll have our war. So I think we need to understand history and the nuances of history in order to not repeat our mistakes and in order to get better. And not only as a country, but as a people. Right now, we're at each other's throats. Liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, at each other's throats. Guess who's laughing all the way to the bank on that? These powerful elitist cabal of people who want that, because what it becomes is a distraction, right? It's again, follow the money. Who's really benefiting from this? We're not benefiting from this, right? We can complain about our leaders all we want, but in the people above, the people that are truly making these decisions, they love every minute of it, because if we stop to realize that they're the problem, then they have a problem. But as long as we're fighting each other, we'll never realize that they're the problem.
I think you're exactly right. And there's great value to knowing the good, the bad, and the ugly about history. Can't just focus on the bad, can't just focus on the ugly, can't just focus on the good. You got to look at all of it. And that way we can be better and become a better nation. So open up the history books, open up the documents, release the things that might reveal and shed light on Americans, on these important events that have changed the direction of our country. Jack, with our final few minutes here, speaking of releasing the documents, what is your message regarding the JFK documents that are still unreleased? We keep hearing about this. In 1992, of course, there was the JFK Document Release Act that was probably as a result of Roger, what's his name? Who made the JFK movie? I'm forgetting on his name.
Oliver Stone.
Oliver Stone. That's it. I knew there was a stone in there. Oliver Stone's movie JFK. We got this congressional act that said by 2017 we need to release the documents. President Trump released some of them, not all of them. Biden's released some. He says a lot of them are redacted. Most of them are redacted. My suspicion is probably the most damning ones are destroyed. But what is your message to people on that, on releasing the documents? Do we need to release them? Do we need to push Congress to release them, push presidential candidates to release them? What's the action item for us?
Yeah, from that standpoint, I say don't get your hopes up, and this is why. And I hate to be that way because there's other things we can do. But as far as those documents are concerned, I agree. They're either redacted to the point where there's only one word you can see on it, which is useless. Why? That's an insult. It's an insult to everyone's intelligence, is what that is. I mean, come on, right? It's like they're laughing in our faces. Or they were either destroyed or they never existed in the first place, which I think is probably more true than anything else, because I don't think people are going to write down, is very much like, when something's clandestine like this and something that's that big, I don't think too many people are going to be writing stuff down in memos, office memos. So that's why when people get excited, I think it's important. Freedom of Information Act is incredibly important, but only if the government and these agencies cooperate, and they're not going to cooperate. The CIA, I don't think, is ever going to cooperate with this. They'll send out stuff, they'll spoon feed us, and someone will figure, oh, this guy was in the CIA and was in Cuba during, okay, so, or that, or something like, or Oswald was whatever. But in the end, they're never going to come out with anything that says definitively, listen, we were involved. We had a hand in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. That's never going to happen. So having said that, I think it's good we're trying. But again, I don't get my hopes up with documents because they're still controlled by the institutions that have everything to lose. So, and as long as these institutions exist, well, people say Alan Dulles is long dead. He's long gone, right? Lyndon Johnson is long gone. These people are not here anymore. Yeah, but the institutions are. And these institutions were responsible ultimately. So whether it's Alan Dulles is the head of the CIA or someone else, it's the CIA. So the CIA has a lot of explaining to do if they ever came out and said, "Oh yeah, we had a hand in the Kennedy assassination." Sorry about that. It was a lot of years ago. We had some crazies, Cold Warrior types. It's not going to look good for them because they've lied about it all these years. Once you lie about something for 60 years, you kind of make your bed. Now you're going to have to lie about it forever. If the truth would have come out right from the get-go, no problem. Right? You hold a couple people accountable, you we get past it as a country, but at least we're clean. It's not this dark shadow that has been following us around ever since, right? We're free and clear of that. It was a horrible moment, but we came to terms with it. We know the truth about it, and now we're moving forward and we're doing better. So yeah, the documents, man, just think about it. It doesn't make sense for them to come out with anything that's going to be a quote unquote smoking gun because it's not going to benefit them at all.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Jack. We're just about out of time, but I want to give you an opportunity to tell people where they can get the book, Killing Kennedy, Exposing the Plot, the Cover-Up, and the Consequences. Where's the best way to find that and to follow your work?
I would say Amazon. You go online, you can go to Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all the major booksellers. Just go on. You'll see it there. Just type in Killing Kennedy by Jack Roth, because actually there's a couple of Killing Kennedys out there, so I always have to say that. But also I have a website, jackrothauthor.com, and if you go there, there's links to all of it, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all the booksellers, and it has some of my other stuff on there as well. So it's pretty easy to find. And I encourage people, what I say is read it, form your own opinions, then go out and do your own research.
Yep, that's it, folks. That's what we need to do. We need to become free thinkers, independent thinkers. We need to become self-learners and figure out the truth for ourselves. Don't take anything you say for granted. Don't take what Jack and I talked about in this interview for granted. Go down the rabbit hole, research it, look up the documents, read books, and come to your own opinions. That's what we all need to do. And Lord willing, we can take back our country, because, folks, if the deep state or the establishment or whatever you want to call it, this global cabal that acts against the interests of the people and the people who duly elected their leaders, if those people, that establishment, can take out the leaders and change the course of a country with no accountability, then, folks, we don't have a country. So it's up to us to be educated, to be researchers, and to act as a result of that education and research. Mr. Roth, thank you so much for joining us on this program to discuss JFK and the assassination for the 60th anniversary. It's coming up here on November 22nd. Thank you, sir, and appreciate it. And everyone, go to his website, check out the book, buy it, read it, do what he said, become educated, form your own opinion, and pass the book along to a friend. Make a great gift for this 60th anniversary and a good conversation starter. Thanks for watching, guys, and stay tuned at libertysentinel.org for more great content like this. God bless you.